Leadership Live. I'm really pleased to be here at the Lincolnshire Showground, our home this weekend of the One event, and I'm joined today by Stuart Bell, who leads the One event, has done for almost 40 years, as well as being the leader of a live church in Lincoln and responsible for the ground level team across the UK and beyond. And so, as part of our leadership program, we're just inviting leaders each month to come and join us as we ask the question, how do we help our church leaders grow stronger? Because we know if church leaders grow stronger, our churches grow stronger as well. So if you've got questions you'd love to ask Stuart, please do get in touch. Please do type in on Facebook Live. We'd love to hear from you. But here's Stuart. Stuart, it's good to have you with us today.
Great, thank you.
I've got loads of questions for you. I've got to watch, I don't ask too many. But the question I'd love to start off with, Stuart, is you have been doing this role of leading the ground level team and a live church for some years now.
You put that very politely.
Thank you.
Yes, towards 40 years. Yeah, so I've been around a while.
So tell me about the backstory. For those who don't know, how did a live or new life church was? How did it start? Tell me some of the early day stories.
Well, actually, I was involved in evangelism with British Youth for Christ. I was brought up as a Methodist, and what happened was we did a bit of mission stuff 40 years ago in Lincoln, and a number of young people became Christians. And I naively invited them to join me on Sunday morning at our local Methodist church. Two things happened. The church weren't too comfortable with this group that didn't quite know how to behave. But secondly, the group that came, and I think about 8 or 9 firstly came, they couldn't cope with the hour's worship, found it quite laborious and hard. And so very quickly, with the permission of the minister, I started a little discipleship group on the Monday evening.
Okay, yep.
Then that little minister's vestry wasn't really very good. It was dimly lit and smelt of gas. And so, again with the permission of the Methodist Church, I started a meeting in our home on a Friday evening. And it was a simple format. We just had some worship. In those days you could sing any Christian song if you could play 3 chords on a guitar, which I could manage. And then we would study the Bible together and share stories. Very quickly that little group grew. We grew out of that home, and I would always say we planted the church really by accident. We got into a hired hall, and then I started to try and find some people who would help me understand what to do next.
So how long ago was that?
That's about
40 years ago. So that was from Minister's Vestry to a hired hall.
Yeah.
With how many people roughly started it?
Well, when we started, it was a handful. Then, within our own home, Irene and I decided to knock a wall down, literally knocked a wall down to get more and more kids in. And it really wasn't just a Friday evening. They'd be in and out our house all the time. Yeah. So the word community was pretty strong then. And in the end, we just couldn't cope with the numbers. They weren't big numbers, but in the hired hall, 40, 50 firstly, and within a 7-year period, it had risen to perhaps 120 people, and the majority having no church background.
So tell me about so here we are, with all the noise behind us here at the One event. The One event was how did that begin? Because obviously you got the church started 40 years ago. What connected hearts to start joining together, which is now this event, which again, 35 years or so?
Yeah, well this is the 35th year, on the showground here.
Wow.
So fairly soon after we'd started, we wanted to connect with people because we always knew we weren't meant to be independent. My dad made it very clear we should not be independent. So we got some help, we connected with some like-minded people, and began to meet, again, a small group of church leaders from what we then defined as the Humber to the Wash region. And after a while we said, well, we're getting on well together, why don't the churches we represent together? First year, 35 years ago, was just a day here.
Yeah.
No tickets, didn't know if anybody would come. In fact, the night before I remember having a dream, waiting at the end, looking for people to arrive, nobody came, woke up in a cold sweat, and actually 1,000 people came for a day, which in those days was pretty fantastic. And so Grapevine was born, and we ran with Grapevine for 30 years, and then did a bit of reinvention, So we're in the 5th year of the One event, which is quite similar to Grapevine, but a few new innovative things taking place, and a real desire to see our strategic objectives of ground level move forward.
I want to talk in a moment about some of your partnership work. I think that's quite a significant part of your ministry. But just another thing I know you've been, for me, about your length of leisure. I'm very careful how I say this.
No, you're doing well.
But consistency as well, which I think is incredible. Is you've met as leaders in Lincoln every first Tuesday of the month, second Tuesday of the month, for again 30 plus years. Yeah. Tell us a bit about that. What happens and the heart behind that.
Well, I would say that's been one of our best things. Obviously, people can't access it from miles away, but it's amazing. People will travel 50 to 100 miles to be with us on a monthly basis, and I think it's been a place where church leaders could meet with other leaders, like-minded leaders, but we always have made sure for 30 years, occasionally I usually speak once a year, but normally speaking, we invite national leaders from other networks or denominations so that there's a variety of speakers, but also people that have been further than we've been, which is always to encourage the church, church leaders to grow in their understanding of the church and kingdom thinking.
Yeah, and I've been to those events myself, and they're always very inspiring. You have some great speakers, and can I say, a great after lunch as well, which is probably half the draw.
Well, the amazing thing is to do that for so long. Behind the scenes, people preparing food, you know, we've never charged for it. It's all very relational, and people give, and it's a very simple format, and it's remained the same all through that period of time. So we just worship God together, communication, updates, few stories, and then we have a guest speaker, followed by lunch together, and we're finished by 2 o'clock-ish.
It's one of those, if it's not broken, don't fix it type of thing.
Yeah.
And on that, you mentioned about the different denominations and networks. I think a phrase I've heard you say a number of times has been about partnership without ownership. That you will refer to our unity is really important to you, but it's not about controlling everyone and going, we've all got to do everything the same. Tell us a bit about your kind of maybe story, how that began, and some of the networks you connected with, and how this passion, even this year, with lots of things that are happening around this term of unity. What's some of your thoughts around unity and the unified church in the UK?
One reason why we changed the name 5 years ago was with this sense, prophetically, that unity was on God's agenda. So we became the One event. And it's interesting, this year, I'm just looking around and everything's one. I'm thinking, I think we got that right in some way. But unity has always been at the heart of what we wanted to do. The strange thing is, of course, when we first church planted, like a number of others, we were viewed as breaking fellowship and not being into unity. So I've worked really hard to prove that that's really not our heart, and that's not true. And one thing that happened for Irene and myself, which we had to wait nearly 40 years, was that 4 years ago I was invited to speak at the Methodist conference. And having left Methodism, I thought that was a very kind thing, but they gave me the subject of why I left the Methodist Church, which was an interesting and very brave thing for them to do, and actually I think it's quite brave for me to go, because in the talk I said, well, I feel it was a right thing for us to leave the Methodist Church, but the kind of attitude and the way perhaps we handled that could have been better. So in that little talk I asked that people to forgive some of that stuff, and then there were people that were able to respond to what I'd said, and the kindness levels were very, very special. The number of people that affirmed what we'd done and blessed what we'd done was great. So I would say at the heart of the ground level unity is a big one, and partnership. And I think more and more as times pass, this issue of control, it doesn't fly today at all. And I do believe that we need to recognize what it is to know the freedom of Christ, but also to recognize authority and to honor fathers and mothers, and to actually work hard to make sure that we're honoring other networks who do things differently, denominations. Some of these denominations have been around a bit longer than us, which means they've something to teach us, and so I've never wanted us to think we're better than You know, we're the latest thing. I don't think we've had that at our heart, but certainly partnership's a big thing for me. I've had the honour, actually, it's interesting this, if there's one thing I think I've done quite well, it's I've been allowed the honour of speaking into most of the new church networks through, of course they're not that new now, but the new networks through the years who hold different perspectives theologically on a number of things. But I've been allowed into those, and I think partly because, you know, I wouldn't go in to those situations saying you're wrong or we've got more truth. And I've always said, and it can mean a number of things, but I've always said I want to be in the radical middle ground, which I know what I mean. But it's like, I don't just want to be on the fringe or the edge. I want to learn from conservative church. I want to learn from people that are a bit on the edge in various ways who have different opinions to myself. And I think the network feels that way. So it's not just me, it's a host of us. We feel comfortable with that, which means we're in a place now where a number of other networks feel comfortable that we are partnering together for greater missional activity, I suppose.
I don't know from experience, Stuart, that's not just talk, you know, often at the one event or those Tuesdays or at the Sonic Leadership Conference, you'll have people from other networks come and speak. You've got them here this weekend from different networks and organisations, and you know, it's not just a word, it's something you lived out. I guess one of my other questions as well, before we go and see what other people are throwing in at us here, would be about you talked about sort of length of service, things you've done over the years, and people say you learn through experience. Not everyone I've discovered learns through experience. Some people seem to go around with the same things over and over again. But if you could talk to those people listening and potential leaders or developing leaders, what are the experiences you've had? Oh, that's a really good learning point you could pass on to others. What experience you've had and learning you've gained from it?
Well, I would say perhaps the biggest thing is learning to navigate the seasons.
Okay, that's good.
So there have been times when it's been everything's like being touched with gold and it's been easy and a blessing, and you wake up in the morning feeling, you know, we're going to change the world. But then if the season changes and hardship comes, and we've one or two stories to that effect where it's not quite as easy, or you wake up on a Monday and think, you know, well, was church meant to be like that yesterday? And you go through a harder season. I think the thing that I think is important is to know that God is with you in every season. And the sad thing is, I have people that I've known through the years who got disillusioned, fed up, started to knock the church. A little disease called cynicism, which I think we find in the British church somewhat. I've always wanted to remain, where possible, in a place where I'm always needing God's grace, if you like, for the seasons that He sets us in. And you know, there are difficult situations, and I think if there's if, for instance, we're a little bit triumphalist and everything's brilliant, everything's wonderful, you know, we're going to be history makers, world changers, all this, everything's awesome. My feelings are some people are going to get a bit disappointed. All of those things are true, but I think you also have to say, but He is with you when the storms are. You know, He's with you when it feels like all hell's let loose against you. And so I think that it's interesting when Paul writes to certain churches, he writes to the Thessalonians, and he says, in spite of your severe suffering. And I find that some of the strongest things that happen, they come through the periods of adversity and hardship. And so sometimes we're dubbed as happy clapping. There are occasions when it's happy and clappy, but there are some seasons when it's pretty hard work.
Just clapping.
And sometimes we lose the clap, if I'm honest. So I think we do need to be able to navigate seasons. That might be the thing that I say is very important to me. And also word and spirit. You know, I believe in the Word of God, the Bible, and I want to remain open to the Holy Spirit's direction.
It's really good to hear. Yeah, I think those things are important. I guess for many people, I've got some people here who are listening and watching here live, and one of the questions is about about the next generation. You know, it's great and honourable and admirable what you've achieved, what you've done, and you know, to sit here on this weekend looking at the event behind, it's going to be very inspiring. But what about the next generation? What about the next person in their minister's vestry with a handful of young people
absolutely.
desperate to build in church into their local community? What do you say to the next?
I think this is also a big thing for us. One of our strategic objectives, we've got 4 of them, that we really want to work on is next generation. So it's part of who we are really. And so in the ground level network, we break into what we call connections. All of them are led by younger leaders than myself. They're not all young, mind you, because we're all aging. Also, I think that we're working hard to make sure we've got a vibrant youth work pressing through 18 to 30s, which has taken its dips and hardship times. We've got a great group now alongside us. And my heart is that bringing through more and more quality young leaders is really what I want to give my time to at the moment. That's what I'm working on perhaps the hardest behind the scenes.
That's good. What sort of ways are you doing that? How are you kind of, you know, intentionally kind of discovering new leaders and then building into them?
Well, for a number of years, I've had young leaders around to our home. I've always felt that it's best to start eating together and chatting together before formal meetings and stuff. And so I've done that for a number of years, and in the context of a live church, which is now 7 areas that we work into, different locations that we work into, all of those couples that are active, or most of them have been in our home, they've journeyed with us. And my desire is that all of our churches are bringing through fresh leaders, new leaders, and I think, and there's a lot of discussion on this, isn't there, transition and succession and all of those things, which Irene forbids me using the word transition. She reckons I've been transitioning since I was 30, and the problem is, because I felt passionately I never wanted to be a cork in the bottle, sometimes if you're not careful, there is the danger you give up stuff too quickly. And our desire would be that we become mum and dad in what we've built, and that we were still welcomed here. I think it's tragic if, after years, people are thinking, behind the scenes, I wish they'd move on. So you have to have people around that are sensitive to those things. But our desire is to bring quality leaders through. So my theory is this, that Jesus, when he had his disciples together, in the natural, he'd have perhaps put John as the main key worker. But, Peter gets this honour in some way. But when he gets up to preach, he gets up with the 11. And I suppose my mandate at the moment is to see a reservoir of quality leaders coming through, any of whom could lead well. Yeah. And therefore not just a star emerging, but a whole lot of really quality, valuable people. And I see a lot of those in our network.
Oh, it's good. It's good to hear that the network is thriving, and not just kind of, you said earlier about aging. I think that's natural, but it's always important we bring the next generation through. Yeah. That there's always this kind of ongoing developing, and we don't, like you say, become corks in bottles. Yeah. And every leader has that potential to be the one that slows things down, or to go, this is what I'm comfortable, the pace I'm comfortable at.
And time moves on so quickly. And the problem is when you get to a certain age and you inwardly don't feel much different. You can't remember names like you used to be able to, but inwardly you feel the same, and therefore making the right calls isn't just a personal call. I think I have a number of people speaking, helping me with that. 1 or 2 that I've given permission to say, if I'm losing it, guys, please tell me. Because we've all stories, haven't we, of things that started so strongly in the spirit that then they peter out into sort of a sad end, and I would never want that. I think I want to see things reinvented, re-looked at, and but it's hard. Anybody that says transitioning is easy, I think, because you're passionate about what you believe in and you carry the weight of that, you protect it as well. And things are going to look different, and there have been people that have given me space and With God's grace, I'll give others space to operate. Yeah.
Just another question here for you. A number of the churches that probably are signing into our church leaders have signed in that get involved with Spring Harvest or probably the ground level network are often smaller churches.
Yeah.
And sometimes we've had this comment made, that we can interview some leaders who are leading big churches or big events, and it all make it sound so easy. And there are many people out there who are either part-time employed or even voluntary leading a small church in rural Lincolnshire potentially. 20, 30, 40, 50 people. Have you got any sort of advice or encouragement for those who maybe they've been serving faithfully and haven't maybe seen some of the, I don't know whether success is the right word, that you may have seen, some of the opportunities and people you've met? How do you speak to those who maybe have faithfully served their communities?
Well, that's why regular connection is so important, so that you're not just assessing success with your own ministry, but you're part of a team and you're saying, all of this is because we're in it.
Yeah.
Even if you're leading a hand, I hope our ground level leaders come with some sense of, this is great. Thousands of people here, I might be leading on a Sunday 20, 30 people in rural Lincolnshire, but this is who we are. And I think there's something powerful in that. Now, we do want all churches to grow. Part of another strategic objective is reproduction. We want everything to be reproducing and growing. But on our team we've got people that are passionate, just as passionate as I am about some of the national things. So we've got people that are really passionate about rural evangelism. We've got people that breathe, live that. And therefore their mandate is to encourage across places like rural Lincolnshire new ideas, new creative ways of what church can look like. Sometimes hubs of different villages coming together for slightly bigger things. And I do think you're right, but sometimes we interview the big success stories of, the big American multi-site churches, and we start to make comparisons. I've stopped doing that because I'm not as good as most of them. And so I think we've just got to see our context, thank God for the call that's on our lives, not compare ourselves with others. Some of the greatest champions of the Christian faith are people that have just turned up and served regularly, sometimes into small communities, because you don't know the people in your congregation. You could have a prime minister there, you could have someone who's going to be a high flyer in the business world that's going to change many things. So it's not to do, is it? We say it's not to do with numbers. We all want to grow. It is important shepherds count sheep.
Yes.
However, it's not all to do with that. And when people come to me and they say, I don't want to come to the church you're in, it's too big, I say, get a life, because where most English and British churches are really very small, and certain parts of the world thousands of people, in buildings and so on. So for me, it's not small or big, it's both. It's not, it's variety, it's different kinds of ministries, and it's the comparison game that's not good.
Yeah. This is great. Thank you, Stuart, for what you've been sharing with us. That idea, thanking God for your calling on your life, making sure you recognise the context you're in, and then not comparing. Comparison is a thief of all joy, and it takes away the fun we get to do in leading church, and that honour it is. Thank you, Stuart, for all you've done in leading the church here in Lincoln, and all that you've done serving the wider church. Thank you for your time today and speaking to us today on our Essential Christian Leadership Live. If you joined us today, thank you for joining us. If you've been watching us throughout the rest of this month, it's great to have you with us. Next month we've got another leadership for you to listen to, leadership podcast listen to in October time. So do look out for us. We'll send the information around. Get in touch. Got any questions? We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.